Good afternoon, Patriots, and welcome to the 83rd audio chat on the Q News Patriot Rumble Channel series. I am the Q News Patriot, joined once again with Peacemaker Sheriff Candidate Aldo Dibelardino from Virginia Beach. My name is SG Anon. Many of you out there have been tracking the ongoing activities coming out of Virginia Beach and Virginia proper itself towards the lawful reclamation of power and control over our jurisdiction, over our territory, and over the activities that are occurring in our community. Virginia is an interesting example when we look at our history because it was one of the original colonies that led the fight against the British Crown and against tyranny to install a proper constitutional republic, I guess is the best way to say it, for we the people in the form that was as decentralized and as amplifying of the individual right as humanly possible. We have a great irony now happening in the Virginia countryside with the tyranny that we've seen. And indeed, it is replicative of the same tyranny model that has been exacted on our great republic of these United States all over our continent. I'm honored to have Aldo back to discuss these issues, the ethos, the history, and patriot efforts that are ongoing in this area. Thank you very much for joining me, sir.
Great day, SG, and great day to your audience.
Well, it is a great day indeed, because as I understand, since our first broadcast just over a month and a half ago, there's been a significant amount of progress, efforts, and undertakings that have happened. We've been following some of the behavior out of Virginia and Virginia Beach on this end, but fundamentally, I think our conversation today is oriented more about the ethos, the history of what this mission really is, and how we, the people, exercise law and justice and law and order to control our society, but amplify our sovereign individual rights to the greatest degree. With that setup being in mind, Aldo, can you give us, a little bit of a summary of what we're getting at here with our conversation today?
Yes, sir. I want to educate and equip your audience with some lawful tools that I hope that they'll find share-worthy, because that's really where the power comes in. We're often told we the people have power, but we feel so powerless because the scale of what's put against us can seem so overwhelming. But I'm here to assure you that our God is sovereign. We do have power. It comes in what we call lawful coordinated liberty actions. So everything I'm going to tell you here is lawful. I'll explain it to you. But first, before we get into some of the details of the tools, if you will, I wanted to touch on the overarching strategy and then in the interesting history. God is sovereign, and he's also quite humorous at times. Virginia is historically significant in this country, but not only in this country, in humanity's unfolding story. The United States has been a beacon of hope for the whole world for a long time, a place where you had an inalienable right that was recognized to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And you had justice that ruled, and you had good standing between citizens and our government and whatnot. And that's what our Constitution was. Founding fathers came. They first hit the beach here, not a mile from where I'm at. There's a concrete cross in the sand called First Landing, and they dedicated themselves to this new adventure with God. And and they settled up the river, up the Chesapeake Bay, into a place called Jamestown. And when you look at the historical record from Jamestown, that's where the first sheriffs were in the United States in 1651. So this rebirth of a peacemaker sheriff in Virginia Beach is significant. We're trying to do this in a manner that's open source, and we are creating the path for others to follow so that this can be repeated in the 3,142 other county or county equivalents in the United States. Virginia Beach is a county equivalent. It became a city from the county of Princess Anne some years ago. The sheriff, by the Constitution of every state, is the highest law enforcement officer in each county. There's a good reason for that. He has a duty to the people and to the Constitution. And the way, the means, the tool for that is our grand jury. Our grand jury is, by Constitution and by the ruling of the 92 Williams Supreme Court case, separate unto itself, not under the authority of any of the branches of government. And it is administered by the people. That means the citizens of Virginia Beach set the rules of their grand jury, as do the citizens in each one of the other counties. Of course, those rules have to be within the confines of the Constitution, and there's some good practices and whatnot that come to us through some historical teachings and so forth. So all that's going on is part of this history, this peacemaker sheriff movement, to get others to follow the path of what we're doing. restore the grand jury, take it away from the courts who are unlawfully operating it and have unlawfully taken it from the people for generations, put it back into the authority of the local citizens and let them use it as a proper tool to hold our government to account. It has been hijacked, and the authorities are using it to rubber stamp serious and criminal indictments. That's why there's a phrase out there: you can indict a ham sandwich. If you mislead a grand jury, they're going to be doing bad things. It's all got to stop. So let me talk to you a little bit about something that got filed last week. It's called a quo warranto. This is on the website, Court of Public Awakening. You can see it there. It's an open source document, and you can use it as you wish. This is a template. Quo warranto is Latin for by what authority. You can file this in your local court in your state against any elected or public official who seemingly is not doing their duty. They're not fulfilling their oath. They're not following the Constitution. We filed this one against Judge Spencer after her false ruling on August 6th. She issued a ruling in a hearing that was very important. We had an open citizen petition to force the Bar Association from the state, which is controlled by the Supreme Court of Virginia, to release the last 5 years of complaints, including the complaints against judges, which is totaled approximately over 20,000 complaints, because every year it seems that over 80% of the complaints that are filed, that they get dismissed, which seems very odd. We had evidence of RICO activity in these dismissals and whatnot. I had evidence from my own experiences as well as others. Judge Spencer said that because I was not a bar officer, I did not have standing to file this complaint. In order for her to cherry pick a piece of the code and use that and then give no explanation, she had to look past or bypass our constitutional right to have our grievances redressed by our government, which is foundational and says nothing about being a bar member. She had to overlook Virginia Code 48.1 that says nothing about being a bar member. It says when 5 or more citizens bring a grievance to the court shall impanel a grand jury to investigate. She had to overlook several other important details, and the quo warranto calls her out on that and says, by what authority are you doing that when you're overlooking the SCOTUS Supreme Court of the United States 1992 Williams ruling that says the grand jury is separate, and then SCOTUS 1974 Calandra ruling that says the grand jury is a protector of the people against oppressive government action. So this quo warranto was filed. The court must issue it. It causes her to have to explain herself. And if she can't, it causes her to get removed from the bench, take this bad actor out of play, and then cause her to have to put somebody else to look back at the issue, saying, hey, you have to be accountable. You took an oath as a judge. In fact, to get appointed as a judge in Virginia, you had to take several oaths to get there. And by the way, in Virginia, there's another boiling problem. The judges are selected onto a list by the Bar Association that's then handed to the legislators to pick from. And that process itself violates the separation of powers and seems to run against what the Virginia Constitution says about how things should be conducted. So this quo warranto is a notice to all the judges in Virginia about that problem. So this is a tool, listeners, please understand what it is, look at it, use it yourself in your jurisdictions, not just in the courts, but if you have a public administrator who is obviously not following their duty in their office, call them out on a quo warranto. This is legally on the record, in the public record. They have to explain themselves. And if they can't, they're removed from their office. This is how we clean house. This is a very powerful, lawful tool. I would hope that your listeners would not just understand it, but share it.
Well, I very much appreciate that you all have taken the efforts and put this publication and this document instrument together to showcase for the audience, because fundamentally what you're talking about is, by what authority do you have superiority over me, right? We are all living men and women. We are all equal with unalienable rights under God. And so the quo warranto returns the power back to the basis, I think, that the proper orientation, if I can use the philosophical term. And when we talk about application of these tools, just for the audience out there, it is worth remembering that engaging in activities that are repugnant to the Constitution and repugnant to state constitutions constitutes felony capital treason under Chapter 115 of the United States Code. And you can also find it in 18 U.S.C. 2381, where it states specifically failure to honor oath of office in the presence of two or more witnesses constitutes capital felony treason. Again, on this issue, these are serious violations. I would characterize the Bar Association with our judiciary at this point as a foreign insurrectionist act that has essentially made itself impersonable to our judiciary. Is that over and above? In other words, Aldo, is that an extreme statement to make, given my understanding of things?
No, I think you're right on. I look at it as the bar has parasitically inserted itself into our judicial system and has taken over like a cancer. And it's gone past stage 4. What I have argued in some of my papers, I was told that Fox News recently did a Sunday morning report. And others, one of the that we have bar mafia behavior. Plaintiffs lie. I've had attorneys lie, and you point it out to the court covers it up, judges lie, and then you bring it to the court in a mass record, and several judges lie. And what happens is, in a mafia situation, the bad actors know they're acting bad, but if they stand up for one another, they can get away with it, so to speak, until the dominoes start to fall. In this case, those dominoes are the dominoes of truth, and the citizens, we the people, becoming aware and realizing we have tools like a quo warranto to call them out. And this also, you're right, this rebalances the power here, where they're public servants. We're not servant to them. You have to serve your oath and your role. So you're absolutely right. It's a problem. The bar is sort of what I call the bar mafia behavior. It transcends just the justice system. There are bar members in other branches of our government, and there are people that align themselves with the bar that are not necessarily, they didn't go to law school or they didn't pass the bar in their state, but they're aligned with that bar interest. And it's becoming really clear. It's a battle between good and evil. And, that's what's going on. The bar seems to be just an organization, and it's transnational, meaning it's not just a United States phenomenon. It's in many other countries. I've talked to people from other places. I, in fact, have a call later on with some people from other continents about how they're trying to deal with it there. So I think you're spot on. It's systemic. It's parasitically inserted itself. It's past stage 4 cancer, because what happens with cancer, when it destroys the host, it also destroys itself. And I try to appeal to these people with deeper sense to say, look, when you destroy the host, you're gone too, because there's nothing here. But my fear is that when we're going to wake up and the public's going to wake up, we've learned a long time ago that absolute power absolutely corrupts. And that's where we walked away from the king, so to speak, and we set up our constitutional republic. But now we're waking up again to say, look, this corruption, the way it is, it destroys everything, including itself.
And fundamentally, it constitutes a shift from distributed power back much more closely aligned with that absolutist model that we fought so hard to leave a couple of hundred years ago. And in that spirit, Aldo, we talk about the host destroying the organism and sort of, leveraging itself unto its own destruction. There are tools such as the quo warranto and others that have been deployed throughout this movement. And another one of those tools that you yourself have been referencing, I think, in efforts off air, is centered around something called a writ of mandamus or a writ of mandamus. Can you explain for me and the audience how that ties into the efforts in Virginia?
Sure. So a writ of mandamus is a legal tool, and it's basically asking a higher court to force a lower court to do something that it's not doing properly. And we filed several of them. In fact, I'm getting ready to file a new one into the Fourth Circuit federal system up in Richmond, because on the 7th of August, a group of 5 citizens who had lawfully and properly noticed the grand jury that was held in the federal court in Norfolk were locked out by the marshals. And so that triggered that writ of mandamus, as well as a lockout on the Virginia Beach grand jury that happened 2 days prior to that. And that request is set, and it basically says, look, here's what's happened. Here's the history and the reporting of it. Here's our standing. Here's where we are. Here's why you have authority. The 92 Williams ruling says, it's supposed to be separate, and this is its function, but they won't allow us to report to our own grand jury evidence of public corruption. And that's the problem. That's the restoring of the accountability. So I would have to tell your listeners, if you're looking for a strategy and a path that helps us as citizens to restore truth and common sense to address crisis issues you have, whether it's the border, whether it's COVID, whether it's our foreign policy, whether it's our energy policy, whether it's our immigration policy, all those things, they're all legitimate and they all need to be properly dealt with. The way to do that is to first restore accountability, which happens through our grand jury. And again, another tool we're using is the writ of mandamus. We're taking a higher court and saying, hey, we need you to force a lower court to follow the law here. And we'll see where that goes. There's a trail of this all the way up to the Supreme Court of the United States. I gave them notice back on the 30th of July. So all this will tie together. It's like tying a strategic noose of legal actions and public awareness around the head of this problem snake, which you could say it's the bar, you could say it's several things, because it's more than just the bar.
Well, you talked a moment ago about public corruption, and thank you very much for the summary with the writs. But you talked about how the public corruption is essentially being defended by the corrupticians who are utilizing the grand jury to their efforts and stonewalling we the people's efforts to stand in and basically administer our separate fourth branch of government as outlined in the 92 ruling and, of course, our Constitution for this great republic. And I want to ask sort of an obtuse question, if I can, Aldo, and that deals with the weakness of this veil, the weakness of the fulcrum that the tyranny system is really built upon. As I understand it, it would only take a single patriot or perhaps one or two patriots in any position of authority, either within the judiciary or within the executive, to really give the screws to this tyrannical system and end up riding the boat eventually. Am I out of line saying that it would be that simple given the circumstances we have?
No, you're absolutely correct in your assessment, and I think that's how this will unfold. We had to lay the groundwork. That's part of what the work's been going on by myself and others. And there are other efforts out there that are applying pressure. There are other grand jury groups doing what they can. And you're right, one person from the inside who has some measure of authority who says, the rule of law path forward is this, and this is what we're going to do, that becomes a spark, if you will. And that creates a chain reaction of change. So for your listeners who are familiar with the Star Wars trilogy, I'll give an example I've used in the past. I think people can connect to this. The rebels smuggled the plans for the Death Star out, and that was a great part of the story. And after analyzing it, they realized that there was this one vent pipe in the Death Star. And if they put a missile down this one vent pipe, it would lead to a chain reaction that would explode the vent pipe, and that would have a reaction across the galaxy to inspire the other forces that stood for good to stand up, and we would see a change in our reality. Virginia Beach is that vent pipe. That missile has been launched. It is in process. And at some point, somebody on the other side or somebody on this side, something's going to change. Something's going to shift. And I want to reiterate to your audience, all of this is lawful, all of it. What is unlawful is the way our elected officials, our public officials, especially the ones who are supposed to be protecting Lady Justice, are acting. And there's only so long, there's only so much shame they're going to put up from their neighbors when their neighbors become aware. And they say, this is not okay. We didn't consent to be slaves. We didn't consent to rule by tyranny. So stop what you're doing, because we're not going to continue to service this. In fact, there are several other things happening, but I think you're absolutely right. We could see a shift in our reality just triggered by the one person actually stepping out and saying, you know what, we're going to change our path here. And I think that's what God's doing. That's what's coming.
If I can be so presumptuous as to daydream a moment, it would be a poetic twist of God's faith and justice were it the unconstitutionally appointed sheriff, excuse me, in that particular region, if he were to come around and realize the nature of the charter that he now holds and the nature of the true oath and responsibility and loyalty, allegiance maybe is the best way to say it, that he currently embodies and is empowered to have. And on that note, Aldo, sort of as my last question, moving through the end of our conversation today, and also in the spirit of common law, there was a discussion had recently where you and the sheriff currently occupying the office in that area that we've outlined in previous broadcasts was appointed rather than elected. You all had the opportunity to actually have a discussion back and forth, albeit through a remote platform. Can you describe in brief how that went and what was the nature of that discussion?
Sure. Let me give you a little context. Sheriff Holcomb is a man, and I want to make clear to your audience, I'm not here to vilify him or any other individual or class of individuals. I'm here to inspire better paths for all souls, including him. To some degree, you could argue that he is a victim because this corruption is so wide and so deep. It was a system he grew up in, and all he knew he was doing what everybody else before him did. He didn't understand on a deep level what's going on. I think he's starting to awaken, and I think he's starting to get a little nervous. Before I started on this adventure, I tried to have a private, off-the-record meeting with him because somebody I knew well knows him, but that never happened. He wouldn't come out into that arena, so to speak. And after I was falsely jailed in October of 2023, that's when I made the determination in my heart to run for the elected position as part of this overall strategy. Just Friday last, I got to participate in a mayor-sheriff forum that was hosted by the Black Caucus of Hampton Roads, but because of their short notice, I was in Florida on vacation. So they made arrangements for me to participate digitally, remotely. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than nothing. We got some interaction. While the sheriff did at one point admit that he's a constitutional officer, it remained clear that he doesn't understand his role. At one point, he explained that there had been some recent arrests in the court for citizens that didn't know how to behave in our courts. I had to laugh. We were lawfully trying to present to our grand jury. Getting him to change that would be rather ironic in God's tale of things, and he could radically change our collective reality. I think what keeps those bad actors from doing that is their fear that when they turn that grand jury authority back over to the citizens, that their neighbors and their citizens will find them guilty, if you will, indict them, and that's their fear. And to that I say, ask for grace. Come forward and admit that you were wrong, and ask for grace from your neighbors and see what happens. Because grace is the ultimate weapon that puts down all battles. Is grace. And we all live by it unmeritably. In fact, in the Lord's Prayer, we're told to forgive others as we have been forgiven. So, I would challenge Mr. Holcomb to consider that. And I think he is in those throes. I've had people that talk to him who talk to me that say he's rather confused and concerned.
We, the people, are a resolute and firm group, but we are also merciful and compassionate. And that is something we all have to acknowledge. So leading into our closing segment, Aldo, you've brought it up on the screen here. You took the words right out of my mouth. This is, if I'm not mistaken, based on our understanding on air, this is essentially a summons for jury duty in that particular area. And it is a questionnaire to essentially elicit your participation to some degree in this activity that's going on in Virginia Beach. Can you give us in closing what this means to you, what this is, and how you all intend to respond if you're able and comfortable enough to say that on air?
Absolutely. This is another tool, listeners of Patriots. You have a choice. You have power because you can exercise your consent and authority. This showed up in the mail yesterday. As I opened it, I smiled about the sovereignty of our God and how just in time this is. It gives me more standing. I actually, by law, have to return it within a certain number of days, or they can summons me otherwise. I'm going to put on here in the remarks that I do not give my consent, and I will not participate in an unlawful grand jury that is controlled by our courts and the bar, and I'll send it back to them. And I'll include this in my future filings. And I would tell your listeners that anybody who's being summoned to participate in a grand jury, for them to respond and to say, I don't give my consent to participate in an unlawful grand jury that's controlled by the court and or the bar as per the 1992 Williams Supreme Court ruling. It's as simple as that. So this is a tool to deny them because they need your participation in mind to run their corrupt systems. That's where they fail to understand things. And they think that, well, we're going to make robots and we're going to automate and we don't really need you. It's no, you need people. And this is how people exercise your power. So, we talked about the quo warranto as a tool to hold people to account. We talked about a writ of mandamus where you can ask a higher court to force a lower court to behave itself and do what it's supposed to. This, when people who get these jury summons things, they can write on there, I do not intend to participate in an unlawful grand jury in violation of the Williams 1992 ruling, period. Send it back to them.
Spoken like a man who loves Lady Liberty just as much as myself and those out there in my audience. Aldo, it has been a true pleasure. God bless you, sir. I hope to be checking in with you again soon in the coming weeks and couple of months as we head into a very exciting autumn season here in the United States. Please keep me apprised and abreast of the efforts happening in Virginia Beach. And for the Patriots out there, I'll be back with each of you again soon on the Q News Patriot channel. Thanks, everyone. God bless. Bye-bye.
Blessings to you and your listeners, SG.